Stress is often called the silent killer, and it can have serious consequences if not managed. It can also greatly affect our quality of life. Well, today we speak with Dr. Gala Gorman, a licensed acupuncturist, naturopath, and author who offers practical advice and programs to reverse health issues resulting from chronic stress. We cover common sources and mistakes many make in dealing with stress and what she terms as kryptonite. So stay tuned as we look to help you as our listeners reclaim their Superwoman or even Superman status. This podcast is brought to you by DJ Works Media with resources and ideas for you at mid-career or half-time of life. Check out our online courses where we want you to not only start, but finish. Books available in all versions and songs available for immediate download with sheet music and instrumental accompaniment tracks. Our musicals are family-friendly with great music that's memorable and inspiring. Sign up at goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter for weekly updates. Now to our episode. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to have Dr. Gala Gorman with us today. And so welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Deborah. I'm really excited to have our discussion today. And
we were just talking because we're on opposite sides of the coast. So you are ending your day and I'm still in my afternoon. So that's always fun though. You know, anywhere in the world, it's just really amazing. And I usually like to, even though I gave just a brief introduction as this begins, I like our guests to introduce themselves and their background. And so that's because we're going to talk about stress, overcoming stress. That's a huge topic and it can affect health. Heart disease, anxiety, depression. There's so many outcomes of stress. So what is your background? Why did you even get into this? And how does it turn toxic?
Yes. So I'll just start by saying, I'm not sure if you told your audience in the intro that I'm a licensed acupuncturist and naturopath. And you probably mentioned that. My recent book is What's Your Kryptonite? Manage the Toxic Stressors Threatening Your Superwoman Status. But as we discussed, this isn't a problem that's limited to women. I just do find that women are more susceptible. So this is kind of a second career for me. I'm not kind of a second career. It's 100% second career. In my early life, I was a CPA. And so I went to school, got a dual major in public accounting and investment finance. I got my CPA certificate license and ran a local mid-size accounting firm for quite a few years. And because I started so early, literally I got my first job in an accounting firm days after I turned 16. I had 20 years in the field way before most people would have gotten to that level. And I was done. and I was done for a number of reasons, but really just wanted something different. And so I had already been studying alternative health, really as a contrast and in reaction to I worked a lot with physicians, medical doctors, and got to see healthcare from like the other side, behind the curtain, if you will. And I was like, there's just got to be a better way, right? And so that evolved. I had already kind of gotten the process started, and then when I left the accounting firm, which happened before I even turned 40, I embarked on this new journey, and so I'm just 100% committed to helping women in particular. That's who I primarily work with. I do work with men from time to time, but usually they're drug in kicking and screaming by some woman in their world, right?
Of course, that's the way they get to the top.
I was just talking to a patient yesterday, and she's like, "My husband really needs this, but I can't figure out how to get him to like come in."
I have a funny story for you after we talk about this beginning, because it's the way. So go ahead, continue.
So one of the things that I start with, I like to help people understand why stress is so important for us to kind of get our heads around. There have been research studies that have concluded that stress is at the root of 90% of disease.
Wow.
And I know that they don't really factor in all the ways stress shows up in our world. And so the statistic is actually low, even, I mean, it's high, even though you might think it's low. And so, so stress is truly life-threatening.
Wow.
And when we think about stress, we think about the kind of stress that's like the stress that comes from a to-do list that's too long, right? And that certainly is stress, but there are so many other forms of toxicity that, because of how they're affecting us internally, primarily, they're creating the equivalent of stress. And we don't have like no amount of meditation or like shortening your to-do list is going to deal with that kind of stress. You're going to have some ninja tactics to deal with that. Right.
Wow. So that's a big deal that it's 90%. Okay. So first of all, I was stressed thinking about the double major of CPA. Okay. That's what that would stress me. My husband's been on that. He's got a head for numbers. I have to work at it. So, but yes, that, you could be that's a wonderful principle though, because a lot of people, this is, the aim of this podcast and my business are for those who are at mid-career, half-time of life, who are making changes. Many want to make a change. Some have to make a change. But there's stress involved in some of that, not knowing like what's next, what should I do? How do I go about all of this? So it's a very, very relevant topic for a lot of men and women. So my quick story here, because I'm not going to talk too much about myself, but some of you women are going to laugh, because my husband was waiting he wasn't going to go back to the doctor until the doctor told him to lose a few pounds. So he was just waiting. It had been months and probably 6 months. I said, no, you need to go. Well, we're close to the hills here. So we had ended up having a rat problem in our garage. So what happened is he was saving a baby rat and it ended up biting him. So I know, which actually you can't get rabies from. I don't think you can get any, but he didn't know that. So he went to the doctor. So that is a funny story, a very, very side thing. But the point is how important it is. Doesn't matter what it takes. Get some help, either reading your book, reading something about this that's going to help you through the next, because you find things that are hidden, which they are. And even though that little bite wasn't going to do him any harm, there were other things that could, the blood pressure and all of that. So I think that's extremely important. So how did you get into, explain, first of all, what toxic stress is, because we've talked about some of the outcomes, and how you ended up really focusing on that as a niche of stress.
So born out of necessity, usually are any of us that are problem solvers. I guess that really is all of us, right? We tend to figure out how to solve a problem because it's something that needs to happen in our own lives.
Right.
And so what I found was that, people I would consult with, professionals I would consult with, would repeatedly tell me, like, you need to dial back the stress. And granted, I live life to the fullest, right? But I meditate. I mean, I exercise, and I don't over exercise. Like I was doing all the things, right?
Right.
And so when the last person told me that like nothing was going to get solved until I dealt with the stress, I'm like, there is just flat out got to be something we're missing,
Right.
because how I can't sit. I'm not going to live the life of a monk. I literally cannot sit and meditate.
Yes.
I love to meditate, don't get me wrong, but I can't sit there for like half the day meditating, right? And so the way I like to explain it to people is that if you practice stress relieving techniques that are supposed to work, right? So meditation, a nice gentle yoga class, walking on the beach in nature, the kinds of things that tend to like put us in a totally zenned out space. And maybe it works for a few moments, but literally within an hour, you're like right back to heart palpitations and digestive issues, and like it doesn't stick essentially.
Right.
Then that typically points to some sort of toxicity that when you have these other, what would be considered normal stressors that most people can manage, the people with this underlying toxic stress that's built up, then just that little bit of extra stress triggers all these symptoms. And so how do you know you have toxic stress? You have symptoms.
Okay. That's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Any symptom, it points to toxic stress. And one of the ways I help people understand like sort of the degrees of toxicity is I have been known to drink a glass or two of red wine, like most of us.
Oh, yes.
It's like, one of those things we you have been accustomed to having a nice dinner with a glass of wine. And so the way I describe it is that one glass of wine is relatively harmless. You're not going to probably lose any sleep over it. Your liver's going to recover easily, not going to be a problem. You can just enjoy it and not give it another thought, right?
Right.
The second glass sounds really good in the moment, right? It's like, oh, that first glass was so good. I'll just have another glass. But then that second glass could result in losing some sleep, maybe even robbing you of some energy the next day, depending on what else you've got going on. Your liver might not have the capacity to do all that extra cleanup. It might take a while.
Right.
But if you have the third glass, it's going to create toxic stress, and it's going to require your body like defer some other maintenance so that it can deal with that, And so the first one is eustress. It's eustress, which is essentially the good stress. It's like we enjoy ourselves, maybe a little social lubrication, have more fun with friends, that sort of thing. It's totally eustress. The second one is escalating stress. That's when like you can kind of feel the effects of maybe this isn't so good for me, but it hasn't quite caught up with you yet. And then the third one is toxic stress. Like by the time you finish the third one, you're like, oh, this is not going to end well. And I'm not going to feel great tomorrow, and I may lose a night of sleep, and darn it, now it's too late to undo it,
Yeah. Can't take back that glass of wine.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's very interesting as it builds, because a lot of health issues build as well. We don't check blood pressure. We don't check, they build. Osteoporosis, if we don't do something about it, we don't start those, weight-bearing exercises and all of those. I've had some things to deal with osteoporosis. It was very hereditary, but I was happy not knowing about it until the doctor says we got to do something.
My husband also is genetically predisposed to osteoporosis, and he's dealing with an issue with his left hip because he's played tennis competitively for years, and just it's an overuse injury basically. But the hip now is bone on bone, and it's not true.
No.
So we had a call earlier with the orthopedic surgeon that's going to do a resurfacing operation, and this guy's just a hoot. He was really fun, but my husband's asking him all the like detailed questions about like, this operation and why resurfacing versus a hip replacement and blah, blah, blah. And so he's showing us all the devices that they use, right? And so if they do a total hip replacement and something goes wrong, the neck, like what they have to replace the original device with is like, you don't want that thing in your body.
Wow.
Right? And so they never tell you that, they just say, yeah, there is a chance of blah, 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 but they don't. I was smart enough to like think if that thing fails, what they would have to do to like get solid bone to be able to like do something next level, that has to be bad,
Yes.
So anyway, this doctor showed us what it looked like. I'm like, oh, hell no,
Yes.
So anyway, you just, that's another thing that's really so important. And I talk about this in my book is, the importance of becoming your own PCP.
Yes.
In the healthcare world, that's primary care practitioner, but in my world, it's primary care person. And you've got to advocate for yourself and ask the right questions and force them to like slow down and explain. And fortunately now there's all these YouTube videos out there and tons of information, and the doctors hate it when you come like asking all these questions, but you know what? It is the way it is. So
it is. And with your own, that's why these are so important. Now we're talking about the stress too, because, and the effects of that, because we are our own advocates. Many times we've gone through that. We've gone through that with parents and having to be also sometimes for your kids, when you're raising those kids, you are in those classrooms, or you're figuring out, a lot of parents are figuring out, this is what I want my kids to learn. They're not learning the basics or whatever.
Yeah.
So we have to be those sort of advocates. And when we think about that toxic stress, I loved your illustration about the stages, because that's very, very helpful. It's very, you can visualize it. I'm very, very visual. So that helps me to visualize. Now you talk about kryptonite. And so can you define what the common sources of that, could you just term it, as that kryptonite? And most of us have probably seen the movie at our stage of life. I've seen everything on
We've seen like every different person that's played the characters, right?
And Superwoman. Yeah. So talk about the kryptonite, and actually I'd like you to tell us what your kryptonite, even though you've talked about what you're that you were facing this, but define kryptonite and then what your kryptonite is.
That is a great question. So, just a little backstory. When I was thinking about what I was going to title the book, I was talking to somebody about it, and we were just having a conversation, and I said, it's kind of like kryptonite. Like basically the superheroes feel their energy draining. And because they've got experience with it, they know it's kryptonite. They may not like see it, but they know it's in their environment, and they've got to find it, or they're, basically their superpowers are annihilated. And so it was such a great analogy, because most of this toxicity it's not like you've got a bowl of Drano sitting out on your dining room table. Obviously you'd be like, holy moly, that's got to go. Right. But that's not the way it happens. And it comes typically into our world and into our bodies in these little like micro doses that we unwittingly allow to build up over time. and then one body, because of just the genetics and what else it's got going on, one body's able to pretty much handle it and detox it and move it out. And another body, again, we don't fully understand why one happens one way and one happens another way, but one body just physically can't manage it, and
Right.
toxicity really builds up. And so, one of the things that I have struggled with insomnia since my 20s, and I talk about that more in my book and in some of the other videos and things that I share. But I kind of point back to my first marriage, and my then husband, snored. And I just really think it got a bad cycle started, because it just I got to the point. I've always been kind of a light sleeper. That's another story, but just constantly being woken up. I mean, there's a reason why they use that as torture, right? Like not allowing somebody to sleep, right? And so it's definitely something that I always have to be really careful about. Like it's I practice all the things to make sure I sleep well. And one of the things that is pretty much guaranteed to wreck a night of sleep is eating too late.
Oh, yes. And very good point.
So, so, that's I think a great example of kryptonite that, where we talked about the 1 glass of wine, no big deal, 2 glasses of wine, escalating stress, 3 glasses.
Right.
Well, it's like, if I am done eating by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it could be as late as 5, no big deal. Right. But if I don't get done until 7 o'clock at night, now it's moving into like risky territory. Right, and certainly if I'm still eating past 7 o'clock at night, it's pretty much guaranteed that my body's going to say, okay, what did you think we were going to do? We got to now work on all this digestion. We don't have the energy to sleep. And most people think like sleep doesn't require any energy, but all the processes that basically put your body to sleep require energy. Right. And then you're still consuming energy, just in a different way when you're sleeping, because all this rest and repair is going on, and your body is suppressing some of the other things that it normally is doing during the day, so that it can free up this energy to do the repairs and maintenance work. And so, so people think, well, gosh, you just lay down and go to sleep, and like, how hard can it be? But there's just a lot that happens, and it's sleep disturbance is probably the most common thing that women report in the ones that I work with. And
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the snoring, actually, my husband always says that he's got bruised ribs because it happens if he's laying on his back. So then I make sure he turns over. That's funny.
Nothing worked with this one. So
really? That is funny.
And,
but that's a very good point, and how important sleep is, because when you have sleep deprivation, it is stressful. And, and I was kind of attracted to that. Kryptonite, I've written a song called Superwoman. So it's been out for a while. Sheet music's out and videos out, which is really a fun song. But it's also how much women handle, as a superwoman. So, and it's kind of a spoof on that and all the things that we do. And I know men do too. They handle a lot. There's a lot of pressure. I did not even realize the amount of pressure that my husband was handling when he was working. He was in management, he was in sales, and on the road there, and a lot of driving, just that alone. And then we had 3 young kids. It was just a lot. And I didn't give him that benefit of the doubt. I was just ready when he came home, here, take over, And so I was ready. 3 boys, 4 and under. I was ready. But
take over. And by the way, when you get done like dealing with all the stuff with the kids, I really like to talk to you, because I need to talk to a grown-up.
That's right. That's right. And even though
I was like, are you kidding me? I've been like selling to all these yahoos all all day long, the last thing I want to do is
talk. Yeah. And even though I was still working because I was fitting it in early mornings, later night, all of that, but it was still a lot of activity with those kids. So yeah, the stress that we carry in different ways and analyzing it. And it's very smart that you were able to at least see what that, and so there's nothing to be ashamed of when we come out of that and we think what's handling some of that stress and how it just keeps creeping up unless we do deal with it. And if we keep stuffing it, it won't get any better. We have to be able to at least, that's why I'm a big proponent of like journaling and taking your time to go through the feelings and all of that and to actually get out of that roundabout. Get out of the circle that you're just circling round and round. And so when you talk about some mistakes that women make, besides carrying this all the way through their lives, but how can they manage, especially women, manage those health symptoms? And because you're also an acupuncturist, and I love the natural way of healing the body and whatever we can do naturally. Sometimes, though, I'm not against taking if you need a good antibiotic, take it. So, but there are a lot of natural things that we can do for the body. So why don't you comment on that a little bit, because you've seen so many that are dealing with this and some of the mistakes, and how do people manage that?
So to speak to the antibiotics, I typically say that antibiotics, if they're called for, are, a great invention. If I have a staph infection, if I have a flesh-eating bacteria, please bring on the antibiotics,
of
right?
Course. Yes.
But they are definitely overused, and
I agree.
And if they are used when you really don't need them, they really require a lot of cleanup and after work to right the ship again.
Right.
So the mistakes I see could really be boiled down into one phrase, and that is suppressing the symptoms. Now, that's like, okay, what does she mean by that?
Yeah.
And how does that happen?
We're all feeling it right now.
How does that happen? Am I doing that?
Yeah.
And so if you take a pain reliever, so here's a great example. Let's just say you're like, okay, I'm going to drink this third glass of wine, and I'm going to pop a pain reliever before I go to bed, and I'll probably have to take another one in the morning, but I'm going to get away with that with this extra glass of wine with these pain relievers.
Right.
And I will say, like, that is a really risky approach, because now you just took the pain relievers, which add more toxicity to a problem that was created by too much toxicity, right? And so the same happens with antacids. If you are taking antacids because you're eating things that are disagreeing with your digestive system, it's the same exact situation. And so, so I can point to every symptom and show how people tend to suppress that symptom and what additional toxicity they're adding to the stew by suppressing the symptom that way. And so what I typically say is that don't have the third glass of wine. but if you already are like, I don't have a third glass of wine, I limit it to 1 or 2 glasses. So now what are you going to say? I'm going to say, okay, so if you wake up with a headache and you've got a super busy day and you are like, I cannot just go back to bed today, so I'm going to have to take that pain reliever. What I say is, give yourself a moment and try to like retrace your steps and think, what did I do that added enough toxicity that I now have this headache that I'm going to have to use more toxicity to relieve in order for me to like go into this stressful day, you know? And so, if you don't, take a moment and kind of reflect, debrief a little bit, then you lose that really valuable information, you know, that allows you to say, okay, I'm not going to do that again. You know, I'm definitely not going to do that when I know I've got to like have a busy day the next day kind of thing. You know,
very smart. Yeah.
You know, we got away with so much when we were in our 20s and maybe even into our 30s.
Yes.
And then by the time you hit 40, like the wheels feel like they're falling off, right? And it's like, what is it about the transition essentially that makes it so challenging? And what happens as our hormones sort of readjust as we're going through midlife is normally our adrenal glands and that kind of endocrine system kind of realigns, and your adrenals, the way I describe it is that your adrenals pick up the slack, right?
Okay.
And so what happens when we go into that period already stressed out with adrenal fatigue, you know, dealing with some of these other issues and symptoms, you know, those are the women that have a really bumpy ride through menopause.
Wow.
And then what tends to happen is they find some doctor who says, well, just do hormone replacement therapy, or just, you know, basically try to artificially, you know, put things in order, when really it's your body begging for some relief, you know, and that relief does not come in more hormone disruption. So,
right. Interesting. And that's where really kind of that analyzation, taking the time to do that. It's interesting. Some of this shows up when all of a sudden we're working out. We're going, how come I can't lose those 5 pounds? You know, and then it's 10, and it's all of it. Well, I used to eat whatever I wanted. You know, what's happened? So there are those are the outward manifestations of that. And also the silent killer is stress. We may not realize that that's building up. And so that's why this was a very important conversation to have, and looking at that, because we might see other symptoms on the outside, but on inside, that's churning and happening, but we might not have analyzed that's where it's coming from. So that's really kind of interesting. So in our lives and our businesses, how is this? What are a couple areas that we just kind of to pinpoint that that you see that most of those the stress and the toxicity come out with lives and businesses on your end?
You know, obviously women who are burning the candle at both ends, out in the business world, like trying to go toe to toe with men and their sort of different approach. You know, those women tend to have a different type of stress, but I will say that even women that were in that world and now maybe they're retired or they've stepped back, and, you know, those are the women probably you're working with. But those women may find that, you know, now they're spending a lot of time out on the golf course and they're having issues. And it turns out that they're spraying the golf course with glyphosate, and now they're getting a huge dose of these toxic chemicals that are building up. Or, you know, you move to a new house because now you know, retired from your job and you can move to another area. You move to a new house and you find that you are having all these symptoms, and it turns out there's toxic mold in the vents.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It literally comes from anywhere. And And the most important thing, really, that if you hear anything from today, is not like, oh gosh, I'm doomed. Like
Oh,
the
right.
toxins
Right.
are everywhere and it's
Yeah. Yeah.
hopeless,
Oh, yeah.
right?
I know.
I
I know.
just
Yeah.
want you to pay attention to the
Hmm.
symptoms,
Right. Right.
and not just
Hmm.
stick your head in the sand, kick the can down the road. Like
Hmm.
when the symptoms show up, most of the time, you actually, the best scenario is that a medical doctor says there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
And something's not right.
Right.
So
Hmm.
now you need to find a alternative
Hmm.
complementary practitioner that
Hmm.
can help you kind of unravel
Right.
the mystery, sort
Right.
through it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's always easier if you have not gotten some crazy disease diagnosis that
Right.
now they're wanting to do some really aggressive
Oh, yeah.
treatment.
Right.
If you catch it before that happens, believe me, you will be
Hmm.
very glad.
Right. And that takes just time away, some time to
Mhm.
meditate, some time to journal,
Yeah.
all of that. So I think that's very, very important. And, also I find some people are facing guilt. They're from their past and they've not really dealt with. Well, that ends up a part of that stress because now they're not working or they're doing or they're not doing their share for the family, whatever.
Yeah.
So, or they feel like they need to be doing something else and they can't even relax. So there's there's a lot of different issues there. So just to understand that, it's okay to take some time off. It's okay to step back and figure all of this out. So those are really great points that you made there. So, so I want to talk about some daily habits because you've talked about a few of those of meditation. Are there some others? Meditation, I would add the journaling. What else with the daily habits would you add for managing toxic stress?
So one of the things that I like to suggest is that you adopt some sort of time restricted eating that, if you really have let's just say you have date night and date night is going out to dinner and and it usually doesn't happen until 7. It's like, one night a week, just try to make sure you've really done everything you can to free up some resources so your body can deal with it. But if you use time restricted eating most days, then that's going to help to give your body a little more to work with. And then also movement. I especially people in midlife, it's actually better to use gentle movement. Yoga is really fantastic. I broke and dislocated my right arm many years ago. It's been, almost 25 years ago now. But it was really interesting because when I went through physical therapy and they were showing me what needed to happen in order to get my range of motion back, the medical doctor, the specialist told me I would most likely never get my range of motion back because of the extent of the injury. And I'm like, that's not happening. Right.
Yeah.
And so I went to physical therapy a few times. And so once I got over the initial visits, they started just doing the normal exercise stuff they have you do. And I'm like, this is yoga, I can do this in my yoga class. Right. And so I went back to yoga class and it hurt so bad, literally tears streaming down my face, really, trying to get my arm to cooperate. And the instructor's really concerned because obviously people are not supposed to be in yoga class weeping from the pain. But I have full range of motion in my elbow. And one of the yoga instructors, in response to me discussing this sort of approach I was taking, was that that yoga is one of the best forms of exercise because essentially we're using our own body as
Yes.
the weight.
As the weights, right.
So we
Yeah.
don't have to use machines or have weights or, any of that sort of thing. You can just use your own body. So there are really super simple things to do. Walking is like the best form of exercise.
Wonderful. Yes.
The other thing too, if you've got access to them, use the stairs.
Right.
As we age, the most important thing is to make sure that we remain mobile.
Yes.
And you need to be able to get up and down off the floor. You need to be able to climb stairs. And so don't let that get started where you avoid the stairs and where you don't get down on the floor because you don't want to get up, those are the things that you want to really continue incorporating into your movement routine. And so those are, I think, some really important daily practices that are just, you work it in. So
I'm so glad that you mentioned the movement. And my husband and I bring him on once a month. He was a professional athlete, and we've talked about the importance of stretching. I always thought it was a waste of time. I never spent time for it. Not now. So very important. And yoga with wall yoga, there's chair yoga. There are so many ways to do that. So, and just, it moves the body. That's a great suggestion. And walking, you have to move. You just have to move. Great points on that. And the timed eating, intermittent fasting. That's actually a good practice for many because there's a 12-hour spot that you don't eat anything at the middle of the night. It's very easy in many respects because it's not full on. I thought, fasting. Oh my gosh, I can't eat for 3 days. No. There's just a period of time of the day that you don't, or the night. So it's very, very, find I'll put some sources also in the notes that would help.
It's super flexible. Like some of the things that I suggest, I have a little process called the Human Energy System Reboot. And I use these 7 ways that we practice like a synchronicity with, and it amplifies the results. And, in each one of those ways, I've included what I refer to as 5 plays. So you can play at any level within those ways, but it's the benefits of doing them together is really powerful. You know,
the all encompassing. So, and as we tie this up, explain detoxification, because there's all these detox diets, and what is that? First of all, how is it risky? And what is your opinion on, is it important, and what type of detoxification?
So to start with, I'll just say that our body is detoxing naturally 24/7.
Okay.
We have internal and external filters that are part of our beautiful design. Our skin is a filter. Our lungs are a filter. Our liver is a filter. Our digestive system is a filter. So our body is detoxing all the time.
Okay.
The problem comes in when we have overwhelmed those systems with sort of too much toxicity over a period of time that's beyond what it can manage.
Right.
Or toxins that the body was simply not designed to handle. There's research that they're finding now where we've got these microplastics that are basically they're finding them being excreted, but our body's just not designed to be able to deal with them, right? And so detoxification is not a wild word, right? It's basically a natural process, but there are times when you need to do a targeted detoxification, specific to a certain thing you're trying to remove. And that is going to require preparation, that you make sure that your pathways of elimination are working properly, because if you initiate a detox protocol and you mobilize toxins, they're liable to be mobilized into a worse spot than they were before if you don't eliminate them, do it right, and so So I just always encourage people to not just willy-nilly find a detox protocol and launch into it.
Right.
Because there's you need to have a good idea of what you're really dealing with, and then use the right, it's sort of like you're not going to use a hammer when you need a screwdriver, right?
Right. Well, that's a good kind of good principle. Just make sure you really do your research. And, even before, because I take very little, now I'm taking, I had an infusion for my osteoporosis thing, but I did the research. I told the doctor I wasn't taking anything until I did the research. So do your research. And I think that's really good warning. So on that, this has been fascinating. I've loved our conversation. I want kind of to sum up with this, if you want to leave one thing with everyone and then give the information how people, because I want you to say that, even though it'll be in the show notes, some people are just listening. So just give that just briefly so people can remember and where to reach you, but really realize, and I write articles all along. These are in my newsletters. Usually I have all of your links in my newsletters as well. So to make sure people get that, I don't spam you. I just put out updates. So, but give us some of that at least one takeaway, and then how our audience can reach you.
So I think the most important takeaway is to really look at anywhere in your world that you're suppressing symptoms and think like, how am I going to manage that better to get the information out of it so that I can really unravel what's causing that symptom. And then the way you contact me or the way you find me, my website is drgala.com. That's drgala.com. If you go to drgala.com/links, there are some quick links to my human energy system reboot, to sign up for my newsletter, that sort of thing. And I am on all the social channels, so you can definitely find me anywhere that is your social channel du jour.
Yeah, that's good. I know I talk to more and more people go, I'm staying off of social media. I basically use social media for business, but it's a great resource though. So I will put all of those in the show notes with this podcast. And to make sure that you're getting, I'll give your information as well. I usually put the video and everything on my newsletter. So goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter. Again, I don't spam you, but I just want to make sure everybody is able to get all of the information. And it's wonderful how you can not only listen, but you can watch. And so I think people, when they watch it, you can internalize it many more times of, the message. So thank you so much for being with us. And thank you all who have been listening. You've hung all the way to the end here. And I just really love to be able to bring these episodes. We're on at least once a week, bring in now several different guests per month, at least 3 guests a month, then once with my husband, and then I speak a couple times a month too. So a lot of episodes, so don't miss a single one. And thank you again, Dr. Gala, for being with us today. It was a wonderful.
Deborah, thank you so much for having me. It was delightful.
It was a lot of fun. So everyone, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you for joining us. It is because of our wonderful listeners like you that we keep going strong week after week. We'd love it if you'd share and follow us to not miss a single show, and even write a review. You can also find all of our articles, products, and links at womenathalftime.com.